You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from around the area and around the world, and we bring you some guests, some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers. We also feature a segment where we speak to people in the field of psychology and related fields. We've got some really huge names in the field of psychology who've been very kind enough to join us and give us some interesting insights. Today, we have a really fascinating guest, a really intriguing guest who's going to give us the rundown on a sport that he founded, or co-founded, I should say, himself. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't know, I'll be blatantly honest, I don't know a great deal about the sport, but I'm willing to learn, and this is a good opportunity to create awareness. Is part of the show is to create awareness of sports and increase participation. So, Paul Hildreth, the co-founder of the sport VX, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi, hello.
Paul, it's really interesting. I mean, VX, for our listeners, I mean, some may have heard of it before. I haven't, only sort of seen only a few snippets here and there. But tell us a bit about the sport, VX. What does it involve? What exactly is it?
Okay, well, first of all, the BBC called it the best sport you've never heard of.
Wow.
And it's not a derivative of any single sport, but people find a little lacrosse in there, a pinch of pelota, dash of dodgeball, a hint of hockey. It's the simplest sport there is. There are no goals, no zones, no markings, no targets. It can be played as a team game, 5-on-5, with 5 balls, as doubles, i.e. 2-on-2, in a squash court with 4 balls, or as singles, in a squash court, 1-on-1, with 3 balls. Each player carries a V-sticks, which is a control bar with a throw catcher on each end. And you score points by hitting your opponents with the sports balls. The tennis ball size, but they're softer. That scores 1 point. And if you catch an opponent's throw, you score 3 points. But unlike dodgeball, you're not in 2 halves. Once the balls are kicked in, you can go anywhere. And if you get hit, like I say, target area is shoulders to feet. Any ball that touches you between shoulders to feet counts as a point against you. You're not out. Stand still, put your hand up, look at the referee. The referee will point at you, say play on, record the point, and off you go. So there are no stops.
So it seems like quite a free-flowing sport. I guess the interesting thing is for me, Paul, it's like obviously there's a lot of sports out there. Many sports you can sort of trace back, even hundreds of years before they perhaps became more officiated in some respects. But what's it sort of take to come up with a sport, to found a sport? I mean, I find it really intriguing that you sort of create a sport on its own. I mean, how did that sort of come about? How do you come up with a new sport?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you here, Jimmy, because it was just serendipity. I had a not very successful technology transfer company. I helped people bring new products to new markets. And one of my clients rang me one day and said, "What do you think of this?" And as he described what he had in his hands, I got totally the wrong end of the stick and imagined people running around with this device that he was holding, pulling the trigger, firing tennis balls and hitting each other, like paintball with tennis balls.
Yeah.
And when I saw him the following week, it was nothing like that whatsoever. But we got the idea of chucking balls at each other, and so we took what he'd got and just totally refined it, slimmed it down, and then built on the idea of throwing balls at each other.
Wow.
And then the rules came in, and it was trialled and developed and refined over a period of time.
Wow, that's incredible. And how long has it been around, Paul? How long has the sport been, in existence in terms
It was launched in 2006 at the Sports Colleges Conference, and since then it went into in the days of the school sports partnerships. The partnership development manager had a brief to improve participation, had a budget, and they took one look at this and it ticked all the boxes. So it went into a lot of schools in the days of school sports partnerships, and now it's starting to go into some colleges, universities, leisure centres. We've got it in some military establishments, youth organisations like it, guides, cadets, scouts. I've even had it in a couple of prisons.
Wow, it's incredible how it's sort of growing. And I suppose you mentioned there how it's sort of, some parallels to other sports, but if there was, like, say, I know it's obviously difficult to do so, but if there was sort of a sport that would, just for our listeners, if they can sort of draw an analogy, what would probably be the closest sport it would be like, Paul? Is there, obviously, it's got its own rules and way of playing, but just for our listeners, is there any sport that may be able to sort of paint a picture for them?
Well, not really. There's a little lacrosse in it, in that you throw and catch with a scoop on the end of a stick. Yeah. Except our stick's got scoops on each end. There's a dash of dodgeball in there because you're throwing the ball at your opponent to score a point. There's a hint of hockey in there because there's some floor work. And a pinch of pelota, because when the ball comes out of the scoop, it doesn't handle like it does from a cross stick. It handles more like a pelota basket. So it's not a derivative of any one thing, but you can see elements of a lot of other things. Some people have said, "Oh, I see a bit of shinty in there," and of course, there's the original paintball inspiration.
And your own background, sort of, Paul. I mean, you sort of how did that come about? I mean, you sort of mentioned there the computer side of things, but sort of your own background. Have you always been a sports enthusiast yourself? I mean, how did you sort of, in terms of your background, what was your involvement in sport before? Were you enthusiastic about sports, or was this something that sort of came to mind and you ran with it?
No, just an enthusiastic amateur. I was a pretty rubbish footballer. My sports tended to be badminton and tennis, so racket sports. I was a German teacher, but I had the sports subsidiary. Then left teaching, went back to university, converted into IT. Stayed on there, did a PhD. From there, I got the technology transfer company, and then with VX taking off as it did at the time, I had to just close that down and run with VX, which is now all I do.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff, and it's fascinating because, like, I can imagine up and down the country there's people who sort of improvise, different sports, and we all play sport in our back garden, and various sports, be it football, cricket, and we have sort of put our own rules together and that sort of stuff. Is this a sport that people can play? What sort of facilities do you need to play this sport, Paul? What's the main equipment that you need to play the sport, and sort of what's the diameter of the field, so to speak? Can it be improvised, or what's
that's a great question, and yes, it can be improvised. Formally, the 5v5 games take part in a sports hall, so 5-on-5, 5 balls. For the singles and the doubles, we just need a squash court, and it's the singles that's driving people setting up clubs, because it's so easy. How do you set up a club? Get in touch with us. You need 2 sticks, 3 balls, hire a squash court. That's what? £4 for 40 minutes, £5 for 40 minutes. So it makes it very easy. Yeah. But you can improvise. If you're playing in an enclosed area outside, you can play informally. You've seen people just playing throw and catch on the beach. And the thing is, anybody can play. We've got a lot of very sporty people, and the things that they can do, when you see them at the World Cup, the top level players, their skills are just mind-blowing. But at the same token, we've got a lot of people that do no other sport whatsoever. People who say, I've got no hand-eye coordination, but we can get them doing this. Anybody can do this. Our oldest registered player is 75.
Wow.
And our youngest registered player is 5.
That's incredible. That sort of range of age group that can play. And I'm sort of thinking, having described that, Paul, I mean, in other sports we sort of think about, for example, in football, you look at other ways to train the players in terms of, keeping them motivated. And you can see, like, the benefits of playing a sport like VX, for, like you mentioned there, like, for a goalkeeper, maybe their coordination as well, the movement, it just incorporates so much. You can see other sports, possibly having a game just to sort of, keep the motivation going and do something different. Have you found that people have contacted you from other codes to sort of see more and know more about what you do?
Yep, absolutely. We've got hockey coaches, lacrosse coaches, rugby coaches, football coaches, and they use this for fitness, reaction, speed, hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, and fun.
Absolutely, that's the main thing too. They enjoy it. And you mentioned the World Cup there, Paul. That's really interesting stuff. I mean, How often is how many World Cups has there been, and how often do they run, and who participates?
Right, well, we have a Team World Cup, which is every 4 years. But the big one is the Singles World Cup, because, like I say again, it's the singles, it's called V2, which is really driving the growth of the sport, because with singles, it's easy to get clubs set up, it's easy to get leagues set up, it's easy to get a game set up. And I think we had our first V2 World Cup in 2012, and this is annual. The Singles World Cup is annual, and we have 3 categories now. We have Youth World Cup, which is age 14 to 17. We have the Senior World Cup, which is 18 plus, and we now have the Masters World Cup, which is age 40 plus. Yeah. And to show how it's growing internationally, 27 was in Italy, 2018 was in India, 2019 was in England again, and 2020 should have been in Hong Kong, but with COVID it hasn't happened. That's been knocked back to August 2021, Hong Kong, and then hopefully 2022 in Scotland.
That's amazing. That's really interesting stuff. And sort of who sort of which countries lead the way, Paul? Who are the most successful countries in these tournaments?
Well, England leads the way. Other countries are trying hard to catch up, but England does lead the way. The top players are English, and there's a top in the senior level. There's a top 3 with a couple of others banging on the door, and say what these guys can do is absolutely mind blowing. But the beauty is, I say, guys, this is a mixed sport. At every level, in every discipline, males and females play on a totally equal footing. So from a primary school taster session to a singles World Cup final, males and females absolutely equal. And in the 2019 World Cup, in both the youth and masters finals, it was male on female.
Wow.
And the noise, because it was back in the UK, so this is where it's better known, it was held at David Lloyd in York. And we had crowds for it, and we had people coming to support individual players. The noise was deafening. The atmosphere was electric, and in the final, the youth final, was there's a girl called Becca Fram, and she ended up she lost one group game against a guy called Andrew. She lost that one group game, but because she only lost one game, she went through to the knockout stages. And she went through the knockout stages and met the reigning, the defending youth world champion in the semis. Now, this lad is the only one to hold the national youth and world championships at one go. But in the European Championship, she'd only lost to him by 6. I said, come on, you know you can do this. The noise was unbelievable. And you fight right to the end, because the referee's shouting the score out as he goes on as best he can. So the timekeeper's counting the score down, and they're going 5, and they're equal. Becca and Oliver are equal, and the score's counting down. They're both going for it, and she hits one right on the whistle to win that by 1 point, and she's in the final. Who does she meet in the final? Andrew Davidson, the lad she lost to in the group stages. Wow. Well, I mean, she was on a high now, and she really went for him. She went for him so much in the second half. She was up in the second half. He was on the floor, gasping for breath with an asthma attack in the second half.
Wow.
Had to go off. He was off for about 5-10 minutes to recover. Came back on, and we thought, Becca's going to have lost her momentum now. And Andrew's got his breath back. And so he really went for it. What a fight. And she won by 3. She won by 3 in the end. We got another female world champion. Absolutely amazing.
Wow, that's incredible, that. And so in terms of sort of names in the sport, you mentioned there sort of a couple of people in the sport. Do you sort of have the equivalent of, say, a Lionel Messi or Ronaldo in the sport? Or are there any sort of, stars within the sport itself?
Yeah, in the seniors, I'd put the top 3, Scott Snowden, Tom Hildreth and Carl Alsop.
Yeah.
And then knocking on the door, there's Dan Raper, who's a Royal Navy Top Gun.
Yeah.
And Matty Horsfield, and then just bubbling around there, Charlie Ford and Tom Burgess. And what these guys can do, it's so exciting. At that World Cup, the atmosphere was just unbelievable. For the Masters too. There was a lass age 60 playing a guy who was almost 50.
Wow.
And the noise was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. Never known anything like it. This sport, I tell you, nothing I've done in my life has the impact that this has everywhere we go.
Incredible. And do you think there'll be a day, Paul, where obviously, people who play the sports may sort of come across from other sports, but do you think there'll be a day, or is there already a point where, obviously with the sort of the people leading the way, like you mentioned there, where someone sort of, as a 5-year-old, thinks I'm going to be the next VX champion type thing? Can you sort of see that happening, where you sort of, obviously in the UK, most people might grow up thinking I want to be a football star type thing, but do you think there'll be a day where people sort of think, well, I want to be the next VX champion?
Well, I'm sitting here in my office looking at a couple of photos. One is my godson. His dad's one of the ones knocking on the door of the top 3, and he runs the Northallerton VX club. Yeah. And my godson here is in this picture, 9 days old, wearing a sleep suit that says "Future VX Champion."
Yeah, that's amazing, really. And so most people who play VX, do they come from other sports and sort of join and just love it, or how does it generally work? Have you had people who just come along who haven't been sports people at all and just thought, what, this looks interesting, and have a go?
Oh, absolutely. We have, like I say, we've got some very sporty people, but we also have a lot of people that do know the sport whatsoever, and they get success here. I'll give you an example of one little lad. He joined us at 5. And I got a message from his mum a couple of years later saying, thanks for this, it strikes again, he's always getting himself ready for this, he loves this. And then a year after that, we were going down to the Scunthorpe VX club, and she was in the minibus with us, and she said, he's just been diagnosed this week with dyslexia and dyspraxia. He's got 0.5% on one of the scales. She said, he tried cricket once. He lasted 1 session.
Wow.
He tried football once. He lasted 2 weeks. In his primary school, there are 7 boys in his class. If he ever gets picked for anything, they put him in the girls' team. He is never picked for the boys' team. Every week, those 6 boys go to gifted and talented. The message to this Ben is, you're not gifted, you're not talented. She said, but he comes to you every week, week in, week out, and gets himself ready. He even won, I think he won a runners-up medal in a doubles competition, and he got medals for, awards from the club, and he was with us until he was 12 and the family moved away.
Yeah, I'm guessing as well, Paul, it's almost like the atmosphere, it seems like a really friendly atmosphere in that environment, really. It seems like, like a communal type atmosphere. Is that the case in terms of people sort of join and they get to know people, and it has a knock-on effect too in that respect too?
Well, we like to try to work towards that. The 4 cornerstones of the sport are honesty, integrity, sportsmanship and respect, and we like to think that runs right through the sport. It's important, so we do try to encourage that, yeah.
And what way do you sort of see it going in terms of, is it possible one day, do you think, for the sport to be, I know obviously, I know obviously there's many sports try, well, the Olympics and so on and so forth, but do you think realistically one day it can be an Olympic sport or Commonwealth Games sport, or do you think there's a possibility?
Yes, but probably not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I think before then probably something like it would be ideal for the Special Olympics. We have a long way to go before we meet the criteria for being considered for Olympics, because you've got to be on 4 continents, which we are, but in 75 countries, which we are not yet. And all of those 75 countries have to be competing at national championship level. And that's before you can even be considered. I can't see that happening in my lifetime. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to build a legacy for this thing to just grow and grow and grow.
And obviously it's important to you, Paul. I mean, for yourself, I mean, what's sort of your vision for it? Where would you like to see this sport go long term? Your own vision for it, all things being well, and what would be a vision for yourself for the sport?
I would like to see it as an Olympic sport. Like I said, I don't think I personally will see it, but I'd like to think that it would get there at some point. I'd like to see it standing on its own feet. At the moment, particularly with COVID. I mean, COVID has hit us very hard, and we're probably going to have to start over again in the new year. But I like to see. I want to see it spread internationally. India are going well. Hong Kong are really going well with it. Africa, it's getting a real boost in Africa. Uganda and Kenya at the moment, and they want to push it into Tanzania and Rwanda and Zimbabwe. So yeah, I'd like to see more. I'd like to see it growing more in Europe.
And how's the reaction in some of these places to you, Paul? I mean, you must be like, seen as sort of obviously yourself and being the co-founder. And what's the reaction like with some of the participants around the world? I mean, you must get a buzz really to think that you've sort of been a co-founder, instrumental in this sort of sport.
It's a very strange feeling, and at last year's World Cup, when we had youngsters, adults, all ages, and we had them there from, like say, Hong Kong, India, Africa, all these different nationalities, and I looked round and there was such a buzz. This is why we do what we do. Absolutely.
And do you need to sort of, in terms of training for this sport, in terms of, I suppose everyone will have their own training method, but do you sort of have any specific training that you would do, or the people that you work with do, to get in the best shape possible for this sport, for the VX?
The top guys do a lot of fitness.
Yeah.
They are supremely fit, and they train together a lot on technique, and they will get together, the three of them. They're close friends, and they will go and handle each other in the squash court, and they will focus on catching perhaps, or they will focus on blocking, and they set up different game scenarios where you get different points for different skills, just for training thing. We have a basic coaching manual which needs updating. We've got a manual written for the level 1 coaching course. There's one on its way for the level 2 coaching course. We've pulled a whole lot of training drills together that the England coaching staff use, and we're going to be trying to put that together into an e-book as well, so that can be released. Because people are pushing the boundaries all the time, and they're developing new techniques all the time. Like Matty that runs the North Island Club, he's developed a new catch which I can't do.
That's amazing. That's really interesting. So, and yourself, Paul, have you ever been beaten in the sport yourself? I mean, are you undefeated in the sport? I suppose you're co-founder. You could always change the rules if you find yourself in a situation where you're up against it. I mean, how's your own participation in the sport gone itself?
I retired from formal competition after the World Cup in India. Because, I mean, okay, the younger lads, if I compete against the lads in the seniors, I mean, I'm in the 60s now, and if I'm competing against Tom and Carl and Scott, well, yeah, I love it. Yeah, great fun, but I'm never going to get anywhere near them. But I competed in the Masters.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that must be a buzz, really, to think that you sort of create a sport, co-found the sport, a legacy that leaves. That's an amazing thing. And in terms of the community around here, Salford, obviously this sort of we get listeners from around the world, so to speak. But predominantly the sort of the listeners are Salford. It's a proud community, sporting community. If anyone listening is thinking, I'd like to get involved. I know, obviously, sort of at the point of this recording, we're sort of in sort of lockdown, or coming out, I believe, of lockdown in some respects on the 2nd of December, but I don't know the full implications of that. But just generally speaking, Paul, if anyone sort of listening thinks, you know what, I'd like to get involved and play, is there anything that they can do? Is any sort of way that you can signpost them anywhere?
Yes, I'll give you a couple of things. First of all, you can get to us through www.vxinternational.com, and the English NGB is hosted in Atherton, Greater Manchester.
Well, that's on it. Absolutely, yeah.
And the guy there is a great guy. He's called Ian Crosby, and his email is ian@vxengland.org.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's not too far away from here as well. That's amazing stuff. So all they got to do is either drop an email or get on the website, and then they can sort of take it from there and sort of go from there and sort of in terms of the involvement in the sport. If someone is playing a different sport, are they okay to sort of generally speaking, I know you can't speak for their organisation, but in terms of you guys, can they also play other sports as well if they're registered playing with you guys? In terms of how does that work, Paul? So if they're, for example, playing football for a team, not a pro team, maybe just an amateur team, for example, are they okay to sort of continue playing both if they're registered with you guys?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Scott, for example, he plays a lot of football, and he's at the top. He's on the top level of our sports.
Yeah,
and he's now part of the England coaching staff as well. So yeah, absolutely no problem there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there's sort of people listening as well from different sports. For example, you mentioned before hockey, football, rugby, even, and many other sports, thinking this might be useful for us to do in training. What's the protocol there? Sort of, Paul, if say a team, for example, a coach listening of a football team wants to integrate this in training, what do they do? Do they get in touch with you guys and find out more and get a more in-depth understanding of the rules and so on and so forth?
Yeah, basically get in touch and we can help and advise how to go about it, the basics that you need to do. For example, one of the things we're very proud of is that we can get beginners playing at a fast pace in 10 minutes. So when we go into a school, for example, you don't make beginners dribble. As you're travelling, you're supposed to dribble, which is rocking the ball from one end of the stick to the other. But if you make beginners do it, it just kills it. And this is supposed to be fun. So all we do is teach them how to pick the ball up, how to throw it. Right, come back in. These are the rules. Put into teams. We play. And even the people that have got poor hand-eye coordination, we can get them doing that. Okay, it's a bit chaotic, individual. The tactics, structure, and communication come later. But we can help somebody get started. So, for example, a club from another sport, so we can advise them, like, this is what you need, this is how you play. Don't make them dribble just yet. So, yeah, get in touch. We can talk people through it. We're here to help and support and advise.
Absolutely, and I can imagine it being a really popular sport in schools too. I mean, being gender neutral and obviously the sort of you can find your own level and it seems like a fun sport to get involved in, which is obviously really important for young people to enjoy what they're doing. But I really want to thank you, Paul, for coming on board the show. It's been fascinating for me. No doubt the listeners are really interested, and no doubt some of the listeners will get in touch for sure. So that was Paul Hildreth, the co-founder of Sport VX. Kind of him to come on board the show and give us an insight into the sport he co-founded on Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi, giving you all the news from the local area and around the world.